From the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, this is Democracy Now!
Voting rights is the foundation and the bedrock of how democracy works. It's how we make our voices heard in our communities. And in Georgia and around the country, that democracy is failing.
As Democrats pick Stacey Abrams to respond to President Trump's State of the Union address, we'll speak with the former Georgia gubernatorial candidate about voting rights, the rise of female lawmakers, Trump's military trans ban, and more. Then, as a documentary about the Women's March premieres here at Sundance, we air a dialogue addressing accusations of anti-Semitism within the movement.
We don't attack Trump directly, and Tamika was in the video telling you that she didn't show up to the Women's March because of one man. Just like we don't answer for Minister Farrakhan. We show up to fight racism, anti-black racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, misogyny, patriarchy, anti-Semitism. Because after Donald Trump is out of office, there will still be all those things here.
We'll hear from Women's March co-chairs Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory, as well as Nancy Kaufman, head of the National Council of Jewish Women. Then we'll speak to Julie Cohen, the director of the Academy Award-nominated documentary RBG, about the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as well as actress and activist Tessa Thompson.
In the last decade, literally last decade, 10 years of filmmaking, that the top 100 films, only 4% of those films have been directed by women. So in response to that, Time's Up has initiated something called the 4% Challenge, asking people to pledge to work with a female director in the next 18 months.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The governments of Mexico and Uruguay are calling for an international meeting in Montevideo next week to discuss a peaceful solution to the crisis in Venezuela. But in another setback to the government of Nicolas Maduro, the European Parliament voted to recognize opposition leader Juan Guaido as Venezuela's interim president. This comes as fear is growing that the U.S. could launch a military invasion to topple Maduro's government and prop up Guaido, who heads the Venezuelan National Assembly. U.S. lawmakers, including Senator Marco Rubio, called on the Venezuelan military to help overthrow Maduro. In a New York Times op-ed published on Wednesday, opposition leader and self-declared President Juan Guaido said he had clandestine meetings with the military and security forces to gain support for overthrowing Maduro, writing, "We have offered amnesty to all those who are found not guilty of crimes against humanity. The military's withdrawal of support from Mr. Maduro is crucial to enabling a change in government," he wrote. On Wednesday, Guaido said he spoke with Trump on the phone, as well as regional leaders in Latin America, including the presidents of Argentina and Chile, touting his, quote, international coalition of support. Meanwhile, Venezuelan citizens took to the streets of Caracas Wednesday in mass protests called by the opposition amidst pledges of loyalty to Guaido. Some protesters called out the effects of the dire economic situation in Venezuela.
We came out to defend and demand that humanitarian aid be brought in immediately. We, as health workers, are not going to continue to allow our patients to keep dying in health centers.
The U.S. has imposed massive sanctions against Venezuela, crippling their economy. A Reuters report published Wednesday revealed that the United Arab Emirates hired over a dozen former NSA agents to spy on activists and foreign governments. According to the report, the UAE recruited the ex-intelligence agents as part of a secret mission codenamed Project Raven. The operatives reportedly worked out of a mansion in the capital Abu Dhabi, employing techniques learned during their time in the NSA. Participants in the program say they hacked into the cell phones of hundreds of activists, opposition leaders, and suspected terrorists using a spy tool called Karma. At least 4 journalists were also spied on. The targets included U.S. citizens. The FBI is investigating whether U.S. contractors illegally targeted Americans' communications or shared classified surveillance techniques as part of Project Raven. On Wednesday, lawmakers in both the House and Senate reintroduced a war powers resolution in an attempt to halt the unauthorized U.S.-backed Saudi-led war on Yemen. California Congressmember Ro Khanna introduced the bill for the third time in 3 months. In December, before newly elected Democrats took control of the House, Republican leadership blocked a vote on the bill. In the Senate, lawmakers passed the resolution 56-41 in an historic vote last month. President Trump hit back at top intelligence officials a day after they offered a security assessment that directly contradicts his past statements, namely on North Korea, Iran, and the threat posed by ISIS. Trump tweeted Wednesday, Iran is actively testing rockets, adding, quote, perhaps intelligence should go back to school. In the occupied Palestinian territories, Israeli forces shot and killed a 16-year-old Palestinian girl at a checkpoint in the West Bank Wednesday. Israeli police say that Sama Zuhair Mubarak attempted to stab a security guard. Local reports say Israeli soldiers on the scene denied medical care to the teenager after she was shot. Thousands of Israelis of Ethiopian descent took to the streets of Tel Aviv Wednesday to protest the police killing of Yehuda Biadga. The 24-year-old Israeli-Ethiopian man who had a mental illness was holding a knife when he was shot and killed. His family had called the police for help and informed them of his mental illness. Protesters blocked traffic on a major highway as they called out police brutality and racism.
Here, we had so many years of dreaming to be a part of the Israeli society, and today we are saying no more violence against us.
At least 43 people were killed when 2 boats carrying migrants sank off the coast of Djibouti Tuesday. Search and rescue missions are continuing, with scores still missing. Passengers were believed to be heading to Yemen. Meanwhile, a migrant ship run by a German humanitarian group docked in Italy today. 47 passengers disembarked after a week stranded at sea as European nations refused to take in the migrants. In Colombia, local media is reporting 2 community leaders were killed over the past week. A gunman shot and killed Delio Corpus Guaitillo, a member of the local peasant association, as he was leaving his house in a rural area of the southwestern department of Cauca. In Valle del Cauca, 2 men shot community leader and housing activist Jose Javier Orozco in the doorway of his home last Thursday. Human rights groups have been sounding the alarm over the mounting violence against activists in Colombia. At least 16 activists were murdered so far this year, according to a local research and advocacy group. In the Philippines, a grenade thrown into a mosque killed 2 people and wounded 4 Wednesday. The attack in the southern city of Zamboanga came 3 days after twin bombings at a Roman Catholic cathedral on a nearby island killed 21 people. The 2 attacks followed a local referendum last week that showed overwhelming voter support for increased autonomy for the Muslim-majority region of Mindanao. In Thailand, hundreds of schools have closed through this week as toxic smog fills the air of the capital, Bangkok. The smog comes from vehicular exhaust, construction, agricultural, and factory pollution. High levels of fine particulate matter in the air have been found to cause premature death and are particularly dangerous for young children. Over 1,000 confidential files from the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation were leaked and later uploaded to a file-sharing website, according to a new court filing. The filing by Mueller's office said the documents were shared with the lawyers of indicted Russian hackers and are believed to have been leaked by individuals in Russia. Taiwanese electronics manufacturer Foxconn is reconsidering its plan to build flat-screen TV panels at a Wisconsin plant in the latest blow to local workers who were told the electronics giant would create 13,000 jobs. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who was defeated in November's midterm elections, offered Foxconn $4 billion in state and local tax credits. Reuters is reporting an assistant to Foxconn's CEO said the facility will focus on research and development rather than manufacturing, which was originally expected to be the main source of new jobs. Trump was a vocal backer of the Foxconn project, saying the plant would be the 8th wonder of the world. The record-breaking polar vortex gripping the Midwest United States has caused at least 10 deaths, including road accidents. A number of schools continue to be shut down, while the U.S. Postal Service has had to postpone mail delivery in 11 states. Amtrak suspended service in and out of Chicago, where wind chills dipped to 50 degrees below zero Fahrenheit Wednesday. Thousands of flights have been grounded across the region. In health news, the American Lung Association says in a new report the government is failing to protect minors from the dangers of e-cigarettes and tobacco. The group gave an F grade to the Food and Drug Administration for failing to act as the rate of e-cigarette use among high school students shot up by nearly 80% over the past 2 years. The reports warn that e-cigarettes contain levels of nicotine that could cause addiction and affect brain development in young people. Meanwhile, a study published in a medical journal found vaping is almost 2 times as effective as nicotine gum or patches for quitting smoking. And Morton Sobel, who is convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage with Julius and Ethel Rosenberg at the height of the McCarthy era, has died at the age of 101. Sobel served 18 years in prison and maintained his innocence until 2008, when he told the New York Times he'd been a Soviet spy, though he said he, quote, never thought of it as that in those terms. In a 2003 interview on Democracy Now!, Sobel compared government persecution in the past and present.
And I say today is much, much worse. For instance, during McCarthyism, the FBI had prepared a list of 20,000 communists to be picked up overnight and put into the concentration camps where the Japanese had been kept. They also prepared a brief for the Supreme Court to suspend habeas corpus. So they wanted to keep the forms proper. They wanted a legal basis for suspending habeas corpus. The gang today doesn't even go to court to suspend. They suspend habeas corpus without any leave of the courts. So in that sense, it's closer to fascism than it ever was during the McCarthy period.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Democrats have selected former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams to deliver the response to President Trump's State of the Union address. The address will take place Tuesday after being delayed due to the government shutdown. Abrams will become the first person not in public office to respond to the president. She will also become the first African-American woman to deliver the response. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer praised Abrams for her work on voting rights. She recently launched Fair Fight Action, a voting rights advocacy group, after she narrowly lost the Georgia governor's race to Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who is widely accused of suppressing the vote. In mid-November, Abrams refused to concede the race.
Pundits and hyper-partisans will hear my words as a rejection of the normal order. You see, I'm supposed to say nice things and accept my fate. They will complain that I should not use this moment to recap what was done wrong or to demand a remedy. You see, as a leader, I should be stoic in my outrage and silent in my rebuke. But stoicism is a luxury, and silence is a weapon for those who would quiet the voices of the people. And I will not concede, because the erosion of our democracy is not right.
Stacey Abrams' new group, Fair Fight Action, is now suing Georgia election officials for mismanagement of the midterm elections. I recently spoke to Stacey Abrams in Los Angeles, where she was attending the National Day of Racial Healing organized by the director, Ava DuVernay. I asked Stacey Abrams about Fair Fight Action.
We have launched Fair Fight Action, which includes Fair Fight Georgia. Our mission is to fix our democracy by forcing changes to our electoral system. Voting rights is the foundation and the bedrock of how democracy works. It's how we make our voices heard in our communities. And in Georgia and around the country, that democracy is failing. And so our mission is to make certain that we take a systemic look at what's happened, from registration to voter access to ballot counting, and make certain that for every state and for every American that the right to vote is held sacrosanct and that everyone can leverage it.
What do you think of Amendment 4 in Florida? And do you see this as a model for the country?
Well, I think what was done with Amendment 4 and Desmond's work is extraordinary. What I want to point out is that Florida had the most egregious laws when it came to felony voters and felon voter reenfranchisement. In states like Georgia, it's not that they don't have the right to vote. It's the complicated forums that they have to navigate to access that right to vote. But I do believe that lifting up the fact that anyone in America who is an American citizen, who is a taxpayer, who has paid their debt to society, should be reenfranchised, and it should not be an obstacle course. And I'm proud of the state of Florida for taking the step to make that reenfranchisement possible.
The governor seems to want to find a way to stop it, but a lot of people are getting reenfranchised or signing up.
I think that what's happening in Florida is a pathway that we need to walk for the rest of the country. And that is not only demanding better action, but then standing behind those demands and pushing better action by those who are elected. Whether it's in Florida or Georgia or across the country, we have to understand that our responsibility doesn't end on Election Day. Because the minute the elections are over, the people who won, who did not share our values, are going to be working hard. We have to be working even harder.
A lot of people credit your race with, well, opening up people's imaginations so that in 2018 we see now the most diverse Congress in U.S. history.
I'm proud to be part of a pantheon of elected leaders who from around this country found their voices and lifted up their communities. What we were able to do in Georgia was build an unprecedented multicultural, multi-ethnic coalition. We tripled Latino and Asian Pacific Islander participation. We increased youth participation by 139%. And we outperformed with African Americans and with white voters to numbers that haven't been seen in Georgia before. And what that signals is that you can win in America. You can win in the Deep South by talking to communities and engaging them where they are and treating them with the respect that every community deserves.
Let me ask you just the last two questions about the latest news. Just today, the Supreme Court voted to uphold the trans ban for now, the ban on trans people in the military. Your thoughts?
I think it's an abomination. These are men and women who have protected our country for the last few years since President Obama opened up the military and said, step in if you want to help. And what the conservative bloc of the Supreme Court has done and said that they are willing to put us in harm's way to suborn discrimination and bigotry coming from the White House. There is no rational purpose for this. There's no rational need. And by allowing the ban to take place while litigation continues through the courts simply says that we are not going to stand up for every American. And that is a shame for that to be coming from the Supreme Court of the United States.
And finally, the video that went viral where Dr. King gave his speech in Washington, D.C. Now we see in 2019 a Native American elder, the Omaha elder Nathan Phillips, drumming and chanting, and young white high school students from Kentucky, from Covington High School, the Catholic high school, mocking him, sneering. Your thoughts on what this means for the future?
I know that there is a narrative that says that we don't have the full picture of what preceded that moment. But the issue is what happened in the moment we saw. And in that moment, we saw disrespect, we saw communities divided, and we heard language that is not appropriate. So no matter what instigated it, what we have to focus on is why this was the reaction. And unfortunately, this begins at the top. We have a commander-in-chief who has never failed to signal his xenophobia, his racism, his bigotry, and his hatred. And that will absolutely filter down to the youngest and most impressionable members of our communities. And so we all have to stand up and say that regardless of why it began, it ends now. And I look forward to being part of that conversation, which is why I'm excited to be here for the National Day of Racial Healing.
Former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. I spoke to her in Los Angeles. She'll deliver the response to President Trump's State of the Union address on Tuesday night. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
Look up, you're not alone. You make a home of your own. Don't let anyone turn you unique into flaws. Yeah, you know that I love you the way that you are. Take those sticks and stones and make a home of your own. Every warrior grows from her battles and scars. Yeah, you know that I love you the way that you are. Black sheep.
Black Sheep Milk here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, where a documentary about the Women's March has just premiered. The film is titled This Is Personal. It's directed by Amy Berg. The film's premiere comes shortly after women's marches were held across the country on January 19th. But some of this year's marches were steeped in controversy, resulting in smaller turnouts. And in the case of New York, 2 separate marches. In November, Teresa Shook, one of the founders of the Women's March movement, called for the removal of the 4 national co-chairs, Bob Bland, Tamika Mallory, Carmen Perez, and Linda Sarsour. She accused them of allowing, quote, anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQIA sentiment, and hateful racist rhetoric to become part of the platform, unquote. In response, the co-chairs accused Shook of trying to fracture the network, denying her charges. Much of the criticism focused on links between some of the co-chairs and the Nation of Islam's minister, Louis Farrakhan, who's been widely accused of being anti-Semitic. As an organization, the Women's March released a statement saying Farrakhan's statements were, quote, not aligned with the Women's March unity principles, unquote. While Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour have repeatedly denounced anti-Semitism, they face some criticism for refusing to personally denounce Farrakhan. The controversy erupted last February when Mallory attended an event where Farrakhan spoke. The new documentary, This Is Personal, captures how Mallory and the movement handled the crisis. Part of the film chronicles an emotional meeting between Tamika Mallory and a rabbi in Brooklyn. Well, on Monday, Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour took part in a discussion after a screening of This Is Personal here at the Sundance Film Festival. It was moderated by the writer Rebecca Walker, author of the autobiography Black, White, and Jewish. Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory responded to the criticism during a discussion which also included Nancy Kaufman, CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women. We begin with Nancy Kaufman.
Some of us were talking yesterday about the media, and the media has not been helpful on this issue. These are I'm someone who's worked my entire professional career in activism at the grassroots level and in Black-Jewish relations, Muslim-Jewish relations, anti-poverty. So I spent my life doing this work. And what I found from my experience is it's all about relationships. And relationships can't be sound-bited. And when you really are in relationship, like Amy and Tamika just described, you learn a lot more about each other and about what you each bring to it. And it's very hard to do that when you have social media and print media and electronic media trying to tell your story for you. And that in this situation has been very powerful and very difficult. It's also very difficult when you're communicating to a grassroots. I have a grassroots organization. I have 60 chapters across the country, and they're reading about Louis Farrakhan, who, hates Jews and is anti-Semitic, and why is the Women's March supporting Louis Farrakhan? And you're trying to message this and have conversations. It isn't easy. And there's just an enormous amount of work that has to go on, person by person, individual by individual. I give Tamika and Linda a great deal of credit because rather than walking away from this or becoming defensive, they actually reached out to many of us in the Jewish community to have the conversation. Has that fixed it? No. Did many Jews not participate in the march? Yes. I was very sad to hear the bus from Brooklyn that was 3 or 4 of them 2 years ago had 13 people on the bus. So it had a ripple effect. I think Jews did show up all over the country, but there's concerns. And I think, Amy, you did a very, very good job. I'm sure it was a big challenge of trying to deal with this. Particularly, and I want to say this, in the wake of Pittsburgh, even though the 56% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since 2016, most of us who know this know that it's been white nationalists who've been perpetrating those acts. It doesn't really matter, because when 12 people are killed in a synagogue, that gives us enormous angst in the Jewish community. And that, I think, played into this in a very, very large way, and really and sincerely. And I think we have to unpack what is anti-Semitism, who are the spokesperson, who aren't the spokespeople, who are we going to allow to be the spokespeople, how do we denounce, I denounce all the time people, and you touched on this, in my community who I consider racist all the time. I confront them. So what do we do about that? And how do we, as leaders, because I think it changes when you become a leader than when you're a common citizen. As leaders, we have a responsibility to really articulate an intersectional approach to the work we're trying to do. So I think this is complicated. I don't think it's resolved yet, but I think it's a challenge, and I think that we will continue to do everything we can to try to navigate it. I also should put the Israel issue on the table to say that is a very, very complicated issue for us as Jews. Those of us who consider ourselves progressive Zionists, who believe in a two-state solution and believe in the rights of Palestinians and are feminists and believe in that women will make the difference ultimately, hopefully, feel concerned about that, but that's a much longer conversation.
I'm glad you raised it, though. Linda, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think my comment is more kind of on a moving forward basis, and I think that's important. I think people walking away from this film, understanding, I think for me, two things, that this movement is going to be messy, and everybody's going to have to make a decision whether they want to be on this table or not. I personally don't have the privilege of making a decision whether I want to be in the movement or not in the movement, because our communities are under attack and my community is under attack, and I have a responsibility to protect those that are closest to me. And so when we have these conversations, it's not just about relationship building, which is very important to me as an organizer. Accountability is also important. And also the understanding what kind of ideologies people are rooted in. So for example, one of the most important things that people don't know, and we haven't had the opportunity, because no media cares about solutions or nuance, they just want clickbait, and in fact have put the faces of two women of color who are under attack, who walk around with private security details because someone's upset because they don't understand why we make certain decisions. We are rooted in Kingian nonviolence. We are taught to attack the forces of evil and not those doing evil. That is what we are trained in. This is how we show up in the movements when you see us on the front lines. So for us, we don't attack Trump directly, and Tamika was in the video telling you that she didn't show up to the Women's March because of one man. Just like we don't answer for Minister Farrakhan. We show up to fight racism, anti-black racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, misogyny, patriarchy, anti-Semitism. Because after Donald Trump is out of office, there will still be all those things here. And God forbid something happened to the Minister Farrakhan. Anti-Semitism has been here way before there was ever a Minister Farrakhan. He was not here thousands of years ago, while Jews have been under oppression literally for centuries. And there will be anti-Semitism after Minister Farrakhan. So for me, the accountability is also on ourselves, to our communities, to say, how dare you at a time when white nationalism is on the rise, where 11 innocent Jews got killed in sanctuary by a white supremacist, the day after another white supremacist was sending pipe bombs to people's homes, the day after another white supremacist shot 2 black people in Kroger's because he couldn't get into the black church, that we made Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour and Minister Farrakhan literally the whole story, instead of focusing on the real threats to our communities, which is white nationalism. So we have been asked and demanded of many things, and we have came out and said we understand and we hear the pain, and I understand. I've been working with Jews for over 20 years. I understand historical trauma, and a lot of this comes from so the reasons why people backlash is because they respond from a place of trauma. Black people have historical trauma. Lots of people have historical trauma. But we have to sometimes go back to our communities and say, let's heal. Let's find ways to deal with this trauma so that we're not imposing our trauma on others who are also traumatized, and focusing on the people that are causing the trauma to our communities. So I'm asking my Jewish family in the room to have those hard conversations that we have decided to have with Nancy and with Stash and Rabbi Rachel and another Rabbi Rachel and Rabbi Barra and Rabbi Joshua and a lot of other rabbis and
Rabbi Barra, Rabbi Allen.
So we're that we're calling you in to have the same kind of conversations that we're having within the Jewish community. Just like I have to have conversations about anti-black racism within the Arab American Muslim community. Yes. Just like I have to have conversations as a progressive leader about homophobia in the Muslim community. I take those platforms all the time in my community. I challenge my people every single day. And sometimes we got to challenge our own people. And I'm asking you I'm welcoming you to challenge yourselves and your community the same way that we are challenging each other right now in the movement. Because guess what? We're all in this together. We either rise together, we're all going to fall together. And I'm telling you right now, in 2020, I'll talk to you about anything that you want. But anybody but Trump. I don't want to hear anything else. I'll talk to you, have the conversations. But all of us are in one boat, and the boat is called anybody but Trump. You either let the boat float or the boat is going to sink, and we're all going down with it. I'll be in Canada, but I want to stay on that boat and stay with you all here.
Thank you. Thank you. Mika.
I think the issue that comes up in the movie is more about our communities than it is about Minister Farrakhan. Mm-hmm. He is being held as a proxy for a lot. And, I've watched that happen over time. I'm not going to say that he doesn't help it. Trust me, he knows exactly what to say and when to say it in order to get the type of attention that he wants to bring to him for his particular reason. And so I'm not sitting here to be an apologist for or an explainer for Minister Farrakhan. The bottom line is that the work that we're doing, the work that is being shown in this film, is work that if we don't all lean into it really, really, really quickly and figure out where is our place, even when we don't agree on issues, as has been said, we're going to go down together. Whenever we can see our children screaming, I want my aunt or anyone to please come and be with me, a baby that is locked up in a cage, laying on the floor with no blanket, nothing, people dying, children, 7-year-olds dying from dehydration. When we see 7-year-olds dying from a gunfight that happened to a young woman by the name of Jasmine Barnes. A few weeks ago, she was shot in a car, 7 years old. I don't know how many of you actually saw this, but 2 people were shooting. She was shot and killed. It was in the news for about 2 days, and the story is over. And the question that I am often asking people who love to critique is, do you know Jasmine's name? Do you even know the name of the person who killed people in the synagogue? Do you know their name, or do you know the name of Minister Farrakhan? And if that's the only name you know, there's a problem. There's a problem when we don't know the names of those who are really, really, really brutally harming our communities. There's a problem. And whatever you think about me, after watching this film is completely fine, because I know who I am. And thank God I have parents who have helped to root me in, I don't want to cry, but I want to say that, my parents have rooted me in such a realness about who I am that even when it was difficult going through this process, my mom and dad kept looking at me saying, you didn't come here for those people. You came here for Ray Ray and them, who are still on street corners in this country, and nobody is going to save them. These conversations, these headlines, these folks are not willing to go to those street corners to save those individuals. They will not meet you there. They will not be there. You have to find a way to help them soften their hearts to come with you, but they're not there. You are there. And that's who you have to go back and get. And every time I put that in the front of my face and in the front of just in my thoughts, every minute that I had clarity enough to understand why I'm in this work, all the noise just kind of went away. Because I realized that the more that I focus on that noise, there is an actual apparatus that is working behind the scenes to ensure that we all focus on the noise and that we don't focus on the real issues that are tearing our communities apart. And I think that the thing that I want to say on behalf of black folks who agree with me, because not all black folks agree, but on behalf of those who do agree, it's very difficult for us because what we realize is there is never, Stash was saying in the film that just at the moment that Jewish folks, especially white Jewish folks, feel safe, that's when actually you all, whoever may be in the room, let's be, personal about it, are not safe. And the thing that I want people to know about my community is that we are never safe. There's never a moment when we feel like we're safe and then something happens. Excuse me, Mom, shit is happening to us every single moment of the day. So we don't ever have a moment of safety. We don't ever have a moment of comfort. We never have that. And it's very difficult for us when people come with trauma that we understand and say, well, we're upset with someone in your community who has helped to lift these people who are in unsafe moments every single day of their lives. Yes. It's very difficult, but what we learned is that the pain that our communities are suffering together is one that's going to make us have to address these issues. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to build a movement that is big enough to fight all of these different forms of oppression. So that's why I keep saying that I have grown so much, because even though I know that the challenge that Black people are dealing with is constant, I also understand that anti-Semitism and all the other issues, the isms that we talked about, are issues that just really are replacing, I'm going to be quiet, they're really just replacing moments. And therefore, we're in a burning fire. And the whole house is actually burning down, and therefore all of us are going to have to become firemen and women.
So we have some questions from the audience, and we don't have a lot of time, but I think these are very important. One, how do you balance the emotional trauma experienced from your personal lives with the political attacks that try to smear your motives?
It's a part of the movement that people don't see, and I think it's important for people to understand, at least for me and Tamika, we have children. I have 3, and it's also the conversations that we have to have with our own children. Why does someone hate their mother? Mom, why do they hate you? Why do they hate us? And my kids 2 are in college, 1 is in high school, so I'm not running around toddlers. These are young people who are not sheltered from the world around us. So, and for me personally, like, people will say, oh, I'll go out with my family and I'll go on vacation, or I don't get to do that. I don't get to be in public spaces with my children like other people get to go to restaurants and have a dinner out with the family, because I'm very easily recognizable everywhere I go. And I've had many moments where people have recognized me and engaged in behavior that I do not want around my children that could escalate. For me, a lot of times, like after, we went to Vegas for the launch of Power to the Polls, which started our voter program at the Women's March, Tamika and I, a friend of Tamika's was like, get a flight, but I got the rest. And a friend of hers actually sent us to Jamaica. Like, we went to some secluded part of the world because we just can't be acting regular in going to places where people recognize who we are. But for me, sisterhood, my solace goes in my sisterhood with Tamika. That is why I will unequivocally stand with Tamika. I will fight for her. I will take a bullet for her. And this is the kind of solidarity that we have built in the relationship that we have, including Carmen Perez, who many of you know. We are 3. We will rise together, we will go down together, and that's the kind of relationship that gives me solace, because as I walk into the world, I know that I have people who will unequivocally stand with me, whose relationship with me is not equivocal or conditional, and also for my family. I mean, my family has been my rock, and for me, finding solace in a family who has understood oppression and came to America because of oppression, and being able to be my Palestinian grandmother's wildest dream manifested in the States is something that holds me and centers me and keeps me sane in a movement that is crazy and wants us to be crazy. And just to say to folks here, I want you to know that we're cool with the headlines. Like, people can write from here to tomorrow about us because we know that we are part of a legacy of leaders that came before us that were also smeared and vilified and dehumanized, including the greats that people were just talking about last week, like Dr. Martin Luther King. So that also gives me solace, that I am just a continuation of a struggle in America where those who are the most effective, the most powerful, and the most intersectional, that are able to bring a lot of people together that usually don't get together, become very dangerous in America and are going to be always attacked, and not just attacked, but just to be clear, there is almost like a there's like a formula for it. They start with certain things, dehumanization, vilification, make you into public enemy number one. They try to break down your movement when they see that they're not winning. The last thing that they do, and they've done it to many before us, is an assassination.
Yes.
And I think that we in this country are not immune to seeing the potential assassination of our leaders, especially under an administration like this one. So what I call people to do is disagree, challenge, critique, but you never want to be part of a story where one of our leaders in this movement is assassinated based on the type of conversation that has been started that we sometimes participate in, or sometimes we just sit back and stay silent, because silence is violence.
Fantastic. Nancy, you want to take that?
I want to jump in because I don't want to lose sight of the common enemy we have up here, which is the white nationalist movement is delighting in the divisions that they're really, promoting within this movement. And I really don't want, I want to really be clear that particularly as a women's movement, as a movement led by women of color, that there's a playbook here. And that's what I think we need to rise above, because Linda mentioned 2020. Every day that goes by, everything we have fought for and that I have fought for and my organization has fought for over 100 years is going down the tubes. The next will be Roe v. Wade, something that is, really, really critical. Mm-hmm. The border, the DACA. I mean, think about it. Every single thing that we care about. So I just want to try to, and I'm working to get my community to look much bigger. And I think, way beyond the day-to-day, we've got to look at the larger scale. And that's what this movement has done and begun to do, which is to pull everyone up. Mm-hmm. So I have to be optimistic.
Yes.
Nancy Kaufman, CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, along with Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory, co-chairs of the Women's March. This was part of a discussion with others moderated by the author Rebecca Walker after the premiere of the new documentary, This Is Personal, directed by Amy Berg. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Tessa Thompson, stay with us.
Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I've gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong. I am invincible. I am
I Am Woman, version by Pink Martini featuring China Forbes and Storm Large. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we broadcast from the Sundance Film Festival. Earlier this week, I caught up with the acclaimed actress Tessa Thompson, who starred in 2 films last year, the sci-fi horror film Annihilation, as well as Sorry to Bother You, directed by Boots Riley. She also played Diane Nash in Ava DuVernay's Selma. I asked Tessa Thompson to talk about the Me Too movement on Time's Up.
Time's Up is addressing safety in the workplace. Obviously, it came out of this watershed moment post-Weinstein about this gross abuse of power. But more than that, it's really looking at imbalance of power. When we have more women in positions of power in the workplace, workplaces are just safer. And in a real robust way, Time's Up has been trying to address issues of inclusion behind the lens and across industry lines. One thing that came out of studies that Stacey Smith has done at the Annenberg is that in the last decade, literally last decade, 10 years of filmmaking, that the top 100 films, only 4% of those films have been directed by women. So in response to that, Time's Up has initiated something called the 4% Challenge, asking people to pledge to work with a female director in the next 18 months. I've taken that pledge. A lot of other people like Franklin Leonard and Angela Robinson and Eva Longoria, Kerry Washington, Journey Smollett, Reese Witherspoon, Tracy Ellis Ross, some other gentlemen that I think are going to announce shortly are taking that pledge. So that's just sort of one way to address, and obviously there needs to be a lot more work done.
You starred in Sorry to Bother You. Talk about that film. Talk about where it stands in the award season this season, but also the importance of who is included in Sorry to Bother You. Boots Riley's amazing film.
Yeah, Boots Riley, I'm so incredibly proud of him. He's on the mountain somewhere. I feel like he'll probably walk in here at any moment wearing some fabulous coat. I think in a way, the awards, what we acknowledge in terms of award season, to me, they've always struck me as being sort of a postcard to the times in a way, that you see what films are really resonating with people. But the truth is, there's a lot that goes into getting films on those stages, on those global stages. And I think Booth Riley recently took to Twitter, because luckily we've had so many fans say, like, you've been snubbed, you're left out of this conversation. But the truth is,
meaning not nominated.
But the truth is, I think the film has had an incredible impact. It's a film that, for my money, wants to really break rules. And for so long, when we talk about inclusion, I think people of color have been mostly ignored in the space of magical realism in terms of that kind of filmmaking. And it certainly was an impediment to getting the film made. But I think what we see with films like Sorry to Bother You, with films like Get Out, is that they really sort of break down those barriers, and they help sort of do away with this old mythology that we can only be seen in one way. And we're not a monolith. So I feel like it's been hugely successful, never mind what awards we get or don't get.
Talk about your role in Sorry to Bother You, how it allowed you to expand, and then also Littlewoods, another film you starred in.
Well, I played Detroit in Sorry to Bother You, who is an artist, activist, a performance artist. And I think for me, I've been trying to answer this question, in terms of my work. I've always been attracted to projects that have something to say. For me, if you're an artist, how can you not reflect the times that we live in? And also, inside of media, we have the power not just to reflect the times, but also to change them in ways, to change culture. So I was so inspired by Detroit because she really figures out this with the intersection of art and activism, and that's been something that I've felt deeply inside my heart, but been sort of unsure how to do and embarrassed to really talk about it, to say my responsibility as an artist is also to be of service. And so I think with playing Detroit, she helped me really step into that more boldly. And I think we're also in this moment where you saw, for example, that the launch of Time's Up happened on a red carpet with women all in black. And that's something that Detroit does so seamlessly, is to use herself as a canvas to try to really be of service. And that's something that I'm really stepping into in this year in a real big way. This film, Littlewoods, that I have coming out this year is really exciting to me. It talks about the access to reproductive health in this country, which obviously is something that continues to be something that we don't know if we'll have. And Planned Parenthood was so kind in helping us sort of do that research. And it started with this idea, the writer-director Nia DaCosta, of looking at the country and really understanding that, I live in Los Angeles, she lives in New York, so we live in a bubble.
Also an African-American female director.
She is. And looking at certain places in the country and seeing, how long would you have to drive to get a safe abortion. And that was sort of the genesis of this film, Littlewoods, which is a modern Western about these two sisters that have to travel from the Dakotas to Canada to get a safe abortion. And it's a beautiful film. I'm really proud of it. It comes out this year. Neon bought it, and Refinery 29, who's also helped hosting this brunch, is helping us spread the word. So
Tessa, let's see. Last year I saw you at the Women's Rally here in Park City, though you live in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
The year before was the Women's March here, which, by the way, Harvey Weinstein took part in. But that Women's March was in response to President Trump just having been inaugurated.
Yeah.
So we're 2 years in. The State of the Union has been postponed for the moment, but President Trump will be giving it. Talk about the state of this union as you see it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I feel like one thing that has happened is I feel like there's been such... how terrible things have been has really been a catalyst for people to wake up and to be more active. And I think that inside of times that are really dark, we've also seen, in the last election that this historic first, with women really coming into power in real palpable ways. And I think just as citizens of this union, I feel an engagement that I have never felt before. And I think that that's something that is, if there's any silver lining, it is that.
Well, what about the Congress that was just elected?
I mean, come on, that's incredible. And also the AOC doc is here. I can't wait to see it. Yeah. So, I think
this is a documentary about the newly elected Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and three other people who are running for Congress. But,
exactly.
And then she was supposed to be here today,
I know.
but because of complications from the government shutdown, was not able to come out.
Yeah, she won't be here, but she's here in spirit. And also just, I think what she's been able to do in terms of invigorating particularly a younger generation, activating, making us feel like the people that represent us are us, and that's really powerful, and I personally haven't felt that in a really, really long time. So I don't know, I feel hopeful.
And Westworld, your role in Westworld?
Yeah, we're coming back. Season 3 we start at the end of March, and we'll continue to try to pose the question of what the nature of humanity is.
Describe the villainess you play.
I play the villainous Charlotte Hale, who's sort of the overlord of this corporation. And I think something that she speaks to, actually, is when corporations really put a premium on the bottom line over humans. In this case, obviously, they're robots, so she doesn't feel
artificial intelligence.
Yeah, artificial intelligence, AI, so she doesn't feel like it's too bad a thing to do. But the truth is we're living inside of times where some of the things in terms of tech and science that this show explores, we're not that far away from. So the show is a constant education for me in terms of engaging with really where we are.
And the role of art and activism. What responsibility you feel as such a prominent actress playing such an important role, a kind of cultural ambassador whose work travels the world? The message you want to send to people here in the United States and beyond? I
think any artist should just be able to make art and not actually have to be the ambassador of anything. I'm a woman. I'm a woman of color. Never mind all my particulars, my other particulars. I have a lot to say, and I think when you're a part of any group that's marginalized or your voices have been maligned, art is a really impactful way to be able to really tell your story and help other people be seen and heard in that space. But I think, for me, it's like I'm of that mind. Like my favorite artists, like Nina Simone, you're like, how could you not reflect the times in which you live? But the truth is, I think people should also be able just to make movies and make content and not have to be the spokesperson or the poster child for any one thing. It just seems to be something that I'm interested in. I think before I thought about acting, I thought about politics. Now I can just play a politician.
Actress Tessa Thompson at a Planned Parenthood event here at Sundance, attended by writers, actors, and directors.
I'm Julie Cohen, and I'm one of the directors and producers of the Academy Award-nominated documentary RBG.
So congratulations on the Academy Award. You broke the news to RBG, to Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Yes, that's correct. The Justice's office patched myself and my directing partner, Betsy West, into Justice Ginsburg's home, where she's recovering from her surgery from two cancerous nodules being removed on her lung on the morning that the Oscar nominations were announced. The Justice's office patched us through to her home, and we got to break the news to her. It was terrific. She was quite enthusiastic. It's hard to not seem to be immodest, but she did say she felt that the nomination was eminently well-deserved. But really, the better news than that for us personally was just hearing her voice. For the first time since her surgery, she sounded really chipper and cheerful and really strong. When we told her how nice it was to hear her voice sounding great, she said she's very eager to get back to work. And I think, she's been working from home, as has been reported on, a lot of what the court does is reading briefs and reading transcripts of oral arguments and, sort of starting to make thoughts about rulings on various cases. So she's been doing all of that from her home in Washington.
As you so profoundly illustrated in your film about RBG's life, about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life, she has not missed an oral argument in more than a quarter of a century. So she is doing this from her recovery bed. Word was the White House that Trump was already entertaining names to replace her. But what's the next time the Supreme Court comes together, and do you expect her to be there?
Well, I should say, as a result of her surgery, she did miss 2 weeks of oral argument for the first time ever in January, as her doctors wisely advised her she needs to take care of recovering from the surgery and getting back to work. The great news was that both scans and pathology showed no further evidence of cancer, so it's a question of recovering from the surgery at this point. And the court hears oral arguments again on February 19th, so that's a few more weeks away, and that's why she's trying to, as she works from home, also trying to rest and recover to hopefully be back on the bench for those arguments.
So what about that news that President Trump was already entertaining names to nominate for her seat?
Yeah, well, I think it would be, on the one hand, it certainly makes sense for a White House to be prepared for who their Supreme Court picks would be, whatever the circumstances are on the court. I think as far as anyone trying to get that out in the world, or, the pretty massive rumors going on online and the Fox News mistake of putting up a graphic suggesting that she had died last week.
Can you explain that?
As far as all that stuff, well, last Monday, just as part of a story that they were doing when the on-air talent was talking about Justice Ginsburg, they just put up a graphic slate that said her name and said the years as if she died. They immediately apologized. It was a mistake in the control room. I take Fox News at their word for that, but what then happened on the crazy, online Twitter sphere is that everyone started to spread that around as rumors, and I'm extremely happy to say, having spoken to Justice Ginsburg the day after that she's alive and well and sounding strong.
And that news of her demise was greatly exaggerated.
Exactly.
So talk about RBG for a moment. We've had you on the show discussing this film, but what she represents on the court and what she has worked so hard on, why she's so important.
I think RBG has represented a number of things throughout her life. She's represented the obstacles that women face in getting their footing in the professional world and all the forces that work against them and how important it is to fight those forces. She's represented, as a lawyer, the importance of fighting for equal rights under the U.S. Constitution for men and women, and she herself became really the prime voice making that argument in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the beauty of that fight is that it's a fight that she made huge progress on. In more modern days, she's come to represent, in certain cases, as the court has become more conservative, she often represents a voice of dissent on the court, writing dissenting opinions on a number of issues, including reproductive rights, women's rights, and voting rights, for that matter, that have really, I'd say, resonated around the country, not just with lawyers and judges, but also with activists and with regular people who were concerned about those issues.
Julie Cohen, let's talk, though, about the Oscar nomination for RBG. You are breaking ground in so many ways. This obviously trailblazing woman, Supreme Court Justice, the film is about, but also you as a women-led team. How unusual is this, both in the documentary section and overall?
Well, we are certainly very proud that all of the lead faces and voices and brains on the RBG documentary team were women, myself and Betsy, the directors and producers of the film, as well as our executives at CNN Films and our director of photography, our editor, our composer, and I could go on, just a woman-led creative and executive team. That's pretty unusual either in docs or narratives. There's been a fair amount of talk in the movie business in recent years about the underrepresentation of women behind the camera. That's been particularly true in the narrative sphere, and it's true again this year in the Best Picture nominees that some of the great women directorial voices, such as Deborah Granick, who did Leave No Trace, that actually premiered here at Sundance last year, Chloe Zhao, the director of The Rider, a really beautiful film, Marielle Heller from Can You Ever Forgive Me, that they didn't get director nominations. Often, even in the case of Marielle Heller, her film had, I believe, 2 acting nominations, and the Best Supporting Actor nominee, Richard E. Grant, made the great point, great performance in that film didn't just drop from the sky. There was a great director behind it, and it happened to be a woman. Hopefully, as women become more common in all walks of the film business, you'll see more women's work getting recognized.
Julie Cohen, co-director of the Oscar-nominated documentary RBG from the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.